right, guys, so this is the last little bit of our notes for this week about the 13 colonies. Just a reminder of what we've covered previously, and at the top of every one of your notes pages, there is a list of vocabulary terms that you need to be familiar with and our big idea questions. So we have covered how the 13 original colonies started. We've gone over every single colony and the reasons why that colony was founded and anything important or really cool about that colony that you needed to know. So we've covered all 13 that you see on this map. What made the colonies alike and different from each other, that's other information that we've covered as well, because we've compared the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies as well on here. And that's been the big point for that. We have covered big events defined in the early years of the American colonies. We've talked about things like Bacon's Rebellion, which really showed the class issues and the ability of the colonists to rise up against their government over in England. And then we also talked about the New England Confederation, which was an early event that showed us the colonies banding together to fight a common enemy, which in this case, that was the Native American quote-unquote enemy that the colonists saw them as. All right, so today, after we've talked about each individual colony, we're going to pick up with mercantilism. Mercantilism is a term that hopefully you were introduced to when you were in world history, but it's going to be very important for our course and what we need to talk about. So it's all the way down there. We're going to start here. All right, you have to give me your best definition of mercantilism. If you copy and paste it from Google, I'm not going to count it correct. So let's talk about mercantilism. It's an economic theory and economic philosophy. Hopefully you see the word merchant in mercantilism, and merchants buy and sell goods. Mercantilism is all about trade. So England is the parent country to the American colonies. So every colony has a parent country, and you use the term parent country because they really get everything from that country, as if like when you're a child, you get everything from your parent. So in the theory of mercantilism, colonies need to make the parent country richer. They need to do everything possible for trade and for resources to make the parent country richer. So England wants maximum profits out of these colonies using this theory of mercantilism. With mercantilism, what goes along with mercantilism, England decided they weren't making enough money off the colonies and they needed to figure out a way to make even more money. So they passed a piece of legislation that was called the Navigation Acts. The Navigation Acts can be summarized in one sentence. The American colonies can only do business with England. They can't trade with France. They can't trade with the Dutch. They can't trade with the Spanish. They can only do business with England, and that is it. The idea of that is if England has a monopoly over everything that the colonies does, everything the colonies do, then they will make more money. A monopoly always gives you more money. That's why the point of monopoly is to own everything on the board. If you own it all, you're going to make more. All right, so the colonies should not be trading with other countries like France, and the colonies can only use English ships to transport their goods. That's part of the Navigation Acts. There's a pro and a con, a positive and a negative to the Navigation Acts. The only pro to this situation is that England's military and their navy are going to protect the colonies. There are such a thing as pirates, and so when the colonies are trading and doing business, taking lumber from New England and shipping it to a port where someone's buying that lumber, pirates do attack ships and steal things from them. And the colonies don't have like a good military to protect themselves because they have to use England's military. So England will protect them. The negative part to this, if you can only sell your tobacco to England, England can set the price. Well, if I'm England and I know that the colonies can only sell their tobacco to me and they can't sell it to anyone else, I'm not going to pay them well for it. And then on the flip side, if you know you can only buy goods from England, England can set the price. Okay. For example, let me fix that typo. If I can only buy something from England, and England knows that, I can't buy it from France, I can't buy it from the Dutch, they're going to charge me high prices. So the problem is they are forced to sell their goods for a cheap price, but they have to buy goods for a high price. That's not fair. That is not fair. So this leads to smuggling and resentment against England. Okay. This is like, when you go to the movies, you can only buy movie concessions and a drink is like $4 and a bag of candy is like $7 and everyone sneaks it into their purse to go into the movie so you don't have to buy the ones from the movie concession stand. You're smuggling it in. And the reason why is because they have a monopoly over food in the movie theater and they're charging you a high price for it. Okay. All right. So navigation acts go along with mercantilism. In order to make more money, England wanted to make more money, they started enforcing this law called the Navigation Acts on the colonies. All it made the colonies do is break the law because they weren't making, like the colonists themselves weren't making as much money as they were before. England's making more money, but the tobacco farmer himself is not. All right. Mercantilism causes slavery to explode in the colonies. Okay. The reason why there are less migrants that are coming from England to live in the colonies, and there is a demand for cheap labor on all of these farms and plantations that are in the colonies. Okay. The practice of African slavery starts to ramp up. Once there are a high number of African slaves in the colonies, racist laws are enacted in every single colony to keep Africans and their descendants in bondage. Remember, previously there was such a thing called indentured servitude, where you would only come and essentially work for free for like 4 to 7 years before you were given freedom and the ability to earn wages. With African slavery, the colonists wanted to keep it different than indentured servitude and keep people in bondage their entire life so that they were free labor for the length of their life, not only 4 to 7 years. When African slavery starts to pick up, triangular trade, becomes very, very big. Let me get this. There you go. Triangular trade becomes even more big. Triangular trade is a trade route that connects North America, South America, Europe, and Africa. These 3 areas, the Americas, Europe, and Africa. And hopefully you see the triangle. Okay. The point of triangular trade, seeing my typos, the point of triangular trade is the Americas have raw goods, that natural resources that are pulled from the earth. Those raw goods are taken to Europe, where Europe has the manufacturing to take lumber and turn it into furniture, to take iron ore and turn it into guns and bullets, to take indigo and turn it into dyed fabric. So the raw materials are coming from the Americas, sugarcane to turn into rum. They're going to Europe, where Europe is manufacturing them into finished materials like guns, furniture, textile, all of that. And then Europe is either taking finished goods to Africa to trade for slaves or sending the finished goods back to the Americas to be sold to the colonists. You need to know what each side was doing in this, and we need to focus specifically on the middle leg of this triangle that is called the Middle Passage, which is the area from Africa to the New World. Okay, so answer everything that you've highlighted, and we're specifically now going to talk about that Middle Passage. The Middle Passage is infamous. If something is infamous, that means it's famous in a bad way. The Middle Passage is the slave trade. Millions of people are going to be forced onto overcrowded ships in horrendous conditions to be sold into slavery in North and South America. Now, African slaves are not just brought to the 13 colonies, they're also brought to the West Indies, they're brought to Brazil, all over North and South America. So it is not just the original 13 colonies. Africans were enslaving Africans. The African population that lived on the coast got involved in the slave trade with the Dutch. And when they ran out of people on the coast of Africa over here to enslave, slave traders would go and raid villages all along the inside of the coast of Africa, capture people, lead them to the coast in chains, and sell them. This would have been terrifying. You would have been literally taken as a prisoner of war, taken to the coast, put on a boat with a person of a different skin color who spoke a language that you've never heard of. You are cramped with hundreds of other people because the idea was you want to fit as many people as possible onto the boat because so many people died on the journey over because they were not taken care of. You were hardly given any food or water, just enough to keep you alive, and you were beaten if you tried to run away, break away, if you caused any disturbance or trouble, if you refused to eat or drink, you were beaten. This is an infamous journey, and it's a part of history that you need to be familiar with because if somebody ever references the Middle Passage, you truly need to understand. When you get to Canvas, you are going to complete an assignment about the Middle Passage. It's in quiz format, but you are going to look at 3 different resources and fill those out. So it's not a quiz grade, but it's in quiz format so that you can get all the answers that you need for that. All right. By 1750, all 13 colonies are each their own different colony with their own cultures, economies, and people. They are organized by geography and economy into 3 groups, the New England, the Middle, and the Southern colonies, like we talked about. Here are the differences between the 3. The New England colonies are, because they had rocky soil and long winters, this is not your large farming. Obviously, people farm for their own food, but they're not like farming to trade food. They make their money off logging, shipbuilding, because there's so many good ports like Boston, Manhattan. There's so many big ports up there. Fishing, trading, rum, and all those good seaports. The middle colonies, because they have rich soil, they're making wheat and corn. This is the breadbasket colonies because of all of the grain that they produce, which feeds the colonies. And then the southern colonies are doing cash crops. This is not food. These are things like tobacco, indigo, rice, and then eventually cotton. They require a lot of slave labor, and there is a lack of ports. There's only 2 ports in the South, and that is Charleston and Savannah. And so they do not make money off of what like New England does because they don't have the ports. I have things on here for you to help you organize the 3. You have an assignment on this that is in Canvas, and this can help you fill in any gaps that you need. Okay, and then this beautiful little map showing you the 3. Now, the very last part, we got 2 minutes left. Salutary neglect. England gets lazy and does not want to deal with the colonies. The colonies are making England money, and they do impose rules on the colonies, but the colonies are just so far away. So England adopts the idea of salutary neglect, and your job is to explain what salutary neglect means. Hopefully you recognize the word neglect, like you can get arrested for child neglect, so how can salutary neglect be a good thing? Salutary means nice, like salutations. So what is nice neglect? Well, the colonies were left alone to do a lot of self-governing, and they were left alone because, look at this map, they were so far apart. You guys do realize that's 6 time zones different than us. Like England is 6 time zones, 6 hours difference than where we are in North Carolina. That's a huge chunk of space between these 2. It would minimum take 2 months to cross this by boat. So the colonies saw themselves as being very separate from Britain, and even though they knew that Britain was totally, at the end of the day, in control of the colonies, they didn't see them as a day-to-day force. The British Army is not patrolling the colonial people. They're not a big presence in their day-to-day lives. So for over 100 years, the colonies are left alone, and they begin to see themselves as something other than British. So salutary neglect was the way that England, Britain, the king, left the colonies kind of alone, and they liked it. And because of that, they really see themselves as separate, and that once again sets the stage for the American Revolution. Thanks so much.